Japan is changing its foreign policy strategy. It's unveiled plans for its biggest military buildup since World War II.
So they made this huge decision to toss off 6 decades of relative pacifism, increase their defense budget by double.
Japan's western flank now, Japan sees risk and threat.
Japan is going to increase its military budget by 26%. This is Japan's largest military budget increase since World War II. In 2023, Japan will spend around 6.8 trillion yen, or $55 billion, on its military. And Japan's Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, wants to make this budget even larger. He wants to double Japan's military spending up to 2% of its GDP by 2027. That's about $73 billion. This plan will make Japan the 3rd biggest military spender in the world. It seems that Japan is turning its military around. For decades, Japan's military was purely for self-defense purposes. The Japanese army did this because it earned quite a reputation in East Asia, but now Japan has turned the ship around. It wants to develop a counter-strike capability. Japan wants its military to be able to fight a war. That's what the growing military budget is about. Japan wants to buy more ships, aircraft, ammunition, drones, and hypersonic missiles. It will develop a new 6th-generation fighter jet together with the UK and Italy. To add some context, 6th-generation fighter jets are the best in the world. Japan will also purchase tons of drones, like the Turkish Bayraktar drone. In short, Japan will spend billions of dollars to upgrade their military. The question is, why?
We can feel a rapid increase in the severity of the security environment around our country, in countries and the region surrounding our country, a strengthening of nuclear and missile capabilities, a rapid military buildup, and attempts to unilaterally change the status quo through power are becoming more pronounced.
Before moving on, just a quick reminder to hit that like button below. YouTube has been restricting my videos a lot recently because of reports from CCP bots. So your like does help out this video massively in terms of the algorithm. All right, now back to topic. Japan's region is rapidly deteriorating. Countries from East Asia are building up their militaries and alliances. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida blames 3 countries for this: Russia, North Korea, and China. With Russia, well, it's obvious. When Russia invaded their neighbor Ukraine, Japan got a little worried. The fact that Ukraine is a neighbor of Russia's is important for Japan. You see, Japan neighbors Russia too. And surprise, surprise, the Russia-Japan border is disputed too. Russia and Japan both claim that they are the owners of the southernmost Kuril Islands. There had been conflicts between Japan and Russia, but in more recent years, this conflict has cooled down. There's no fighting between Russia and Japan, and it'll likely stay that way. Russia's war with Ukraine hasn't gone smoothly, to say the least. The war has been going on for 10 months. Russia's military has been underperforming Putin's expectations. It would be foolish for Russia to start another war on its eastern border. So Russia isn't Japan's biggest worry. Japan is probably more worried about another country that's close to them, North Korea. Because when you think of North Korea, you think of nuclear bombs. That's right.
North Korea has launched a missile over Japan, sparking anger in Tokyo.
North Korea has repeatedly flown missiles over Japan. This is terrifying for Japanese citizens. They know perfectly well what could be on those missiles: nuclear warheads. Kim Jong-un has an estimated 40 nuclear bombs. That's nothing compared to the United States' 31,255 warheads, but 40 nuclear warheads are nothing to treat lightly. And Japan doesn't treat it lightly, as we can see from the massive budget increase. North Korea is definitely one of the reasons for developing a counter-strike capability. When Japan has hypersonic missiles of their own, Kim Jong-un will think twice before attacking them. But even North Korea isn't the biggest reason for this military spending increase. China is.
China.
For the last 30 years, China's military spending has increased drastically, at least 42-fold.
Tensions have already been escalated very much by China.
China is the largest threat to the security of Japan. I quote an official national security document here. It describes China as the greatest strategic challenge ever to securing the peace and stability of Japan. This is a huge change in attitude towards China. In 2013, Japan described China as a strategic partner, but a lot has changed since then. One chart can explain this: the military spending of China and Japan. You see, in 2013, the situation was a whole lot different. Japan's military spending was around $49 billion, while China's military was already on the rise with $164 billion in 2013. And this isn't even close to the current number. China's military budget is now close to $230 billion. Beijing has increased its military budget by around 7% every year. Meanwhile, Japan's budget has been shrinking. The Chinese military is now 4 times as big as that of Japan's, at least in numbers. But Japan will stay safe, right? There's no reason for China to attack Japan? Well, not quite. Japan's in a very dangerous situation.
Taiwan wants to show that it's ready.
Military jets flying towards Taiwanese airspace.
Taiwan is self-governing, but China sees this land as its own.
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
The situation is getting worse, and we need to prepare for the worst possible scenario.
Japan's dangerous situation has to do with Taiwan. China doesn't like the whole Taiwan situation. Xi Jinping wants Taiwan to be a province of the People's Republic of China. If Xi doesn't get what he wants, he could use his military. We all know that China is provoking Taiwan with military drills. China sends Navy ships and military aircraft over Taiwan's border all the time. In 2022, China sent 1,727 aircraft over the Taiwan Strait. While this is alarming for Taipei, it also causes a big headache for Tokyo. The first issue for Japan is its proximity to Taiwan. While Tokyo is around 1,300 miles from Taipei, some of Japan's territories lie much closer. These territories are called the Southwest Islands. This island chain is just miles away from the Taiwanese mainland. The island closest to Taiwan, Yonaguni, is just 100 miles away from Taipei. It goes without saying that these islands are located at a very strategic location, and Japan knows this. Japan has lots of military bases on these islands. Or, well, should I say the United States of America has lots of military bases on these islands. One island stands out: the Japanese Okinawa Island. This island hosts 32 U.S. military facilities. In fact, 70.6% of all the U.S. military land in Japan is located on this island. This is where things get tricky for Japan.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
The United States backs up Taiwan's independence. If China attacks Taiwan, we can't rule out U.S. military intervention. In other words, we can't rule out an all-out war in East Asia. This is where Japan's Southwest Islands come in. They house very important military bases. If the US gets involved in these conflicts, these Japanese island bases will be very important. As a NATO ally, Japan would certainly back the US up, so these bases on Okinawa will be crucial in a possible war. The thing is, Xi Jinping knows this. He knows that if he wants to attack Taiwan, he needs to prevent a US counterattack from Japan. Long story short, it's possible that Japan could be dragged into this Taiwan conflict.
Japan unveiled a new national security strategy today, along with details of its biggest military buildup since World War II.
That's what Japan is preparing for. It wants to prevent China from attacking its bases on the Southwest Islands. This is a huge reason for why Japan is spending billions of dollars on its military. Japan wants its military to be able to defend the islands. In order to do this, it needs to be able to strike China back at any moment. China won't drag Japan into the conflict if Japan can do this. For this counter-strike capability, well, you need an advanced and powerful military. So Japan has to break their purely self-defense policy to protect themselves from China's threat. But there's more to be discussed here. China and Japan are very similar to each other in a lot of ways. To understand that, we have to go back in history.
The 50s marked a turn for the Japanese economy. It began to industrialize, and it became a hub for the development of electronics, automobiles, steel, and other high-tech devices. Products soared, and the economy skyrocketed in the 60s. It was dubbed the economic miracle.
In the 1960s, Japan's economy was rapidly expanding. It grew by an average of 10% a year. In 1968, Japan's economy became the second largest economy in the world. Japan's economy continued to grow. In the 1980s, American media thought that Japan would overtake the United States as the biggest economy. At the time, it sure looked like it would. TVs, cars, computers, they were all being made by gigantic Japanese corporations. People started publishing books about how these corporations would take over the world. Japan's economic system was superior to that in the US. Until it wasn't. After the 1990s, Japan's economy stagnated. Did Japan take over the world with its superior economy? Nope.
In 1976, right after the death of Chairman Mao, the economy was a wreck. The new leader of the People's Republic opened China up to the world, and bringing so much investments that they eventually turned China into a global factory.
After Japan's economy stopped growing, a new East Asian giant emerged: China. The CCP's leader at the time, Deng Xiaoping, opened up China's doors to the world in new economic reforms. These economic reforms worked very well. China's economy grew by more than 10% a year. In 2010, China became the world's second largest economy. In recent years, the media has been catching up to this. China could overtake the US as the world's largest economy. The similarities start to show between China and Japan. The Japanese and the Chinese economic miracles are remarkably similar to each other. And Japan's economic miracle failed. China's economic miracle could fail for the same reasons. There are a few reasons for Japan's economic downfall. It began with the lost decade. In 1991, a massive asset price bubble collapsed in Japan. Real estate and the stock market were priced insanely high. This had to do with huge quantitative easing, or money printing. The Japanese government was printing way too much money. This resulted in way too much money going into Japanese markets, and Japan was artificially creating a huge bubble. And, bubbles have a tendency to burst. The Japanese bubble was no exception, as we can see on this chart. After a huge peak, the Japanese stock market index fell by more than 50%. More than 30 years later, the Japanese stock market still hasn't recovered. Now that's a big bubble. Whether China will experience such a bubble remains to be seen, but China is certainly not immune from such financial disasters. Just look at China's housing bubble last year. After the Chinese housing market crashed, the entire Chinese economy took a hit. But it's not only an asset bubble that caused Japan's economy to crash. Japan's economy still hasn't recovered from the lost decade. Much of this has to do with its population collapse. This can be explained with two charts. Since 1980, Japan's population increase has been slowing down, and during the last decade, its population has been declining. What's even more concerning is the average age in Japan. Japan's population has the highest median age in the world, with 48.6 years. This means that a huge part of the population is too old to work. Because Japan's population was too old, the Japanese economy could never recover from the lost decade. Now there happens to be another country with an aging population: China. China's population is aging faster than any other country in modern history. We can look at Japan and see what the effects of this are: an economic slowdown. You see, China's economy was powered on cheap labor and exports, just like Japan. But with an aging population, you don't have the people to pull that off anymore. And China's population is aging fast. Look at China's population under 40. Those are the people you need for your economy. But this population group is going to collapse in China. So Japan had a huge asset bubble and a population collapse. China has a housing bubble and a population collapse of its own. But there's one more similarity to be drawn: competition. During Japan's economic miracle, Japan was the only developed economy in East Asia. But in the 1990s, Japan wasn't alone in this anymore. Meet the four Asian tigers. South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore had economic miracles of their own. This was good news for East Asia as a whole, but bad news for Japan. The industries that Japan dominated, such as electronics, now faced competition. And the four Asian tigers performed very well in these industries. Japan couldn't be the economic powerhouse of the world anymore, because these other countries took their market share away. Now back to China. China is currently the manufacturing hub of the world. It produces a whopping 28% of the world's manufacturing output. But the same could happen to China as Japan. There are a lot of other countries waiting in line to snap China's market share away. India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam, just to name a few. These countries all have one thing in common: low production cost. Take India, for example. India has the lowest manufacturing cost in the world. This will be detrimental to China's manufacturing industry in the long term. If it's cheaper to manufacture in other countries, businesses will move away from China. Apple is already planning to move its manufacturing out of China. Again, we can look at Japan and see how this will play out. After it lost its dominance in its industries, its economy changed to a service-based economy. This took away a lot of the explosive growth it had when it was a manufacturing economy. The same will happen in China, too. Or rather, the same is happening in China, too. US manufacturing orders in China fell by 40%. The move to the new Asian tigers is happening right now. It's inevitable that the Chinese economy will slow down, just like the Japanese economy did. But how is this related to Japanese military budgets, you ask? Well, when the Chinese economy slows down, it'll be the end of an era. When China stops growing, we'll see a geopolitical shift in East Asia. Much of China's power has to do with its economic growth and its huge population. But when you take those things away, the whole thing could collapse like a house of cards. Will it make the region safer? Perhaps it will. But on the other hand, a destabilized China could be more dangerous than it is now. An economic slowdown will debunk many of the reasons for President Xi Jinping's absolute power, if any. And a dictator losing his grip on power is pretty unpredictable. All Japan can do is prepare for the worst.